What's going on, world? Thank you all so much for tuning in into this episode. Today, I have another guest on the show, Andrew Adeniyi, and he is the author of The Circle of Leadership. And we're going to really dive into his book and just the process of what he's describing throughout the book for you all. And also, he has his own consulting business that focuses on organizational culture, business strategy, and diversity and inclusion, which are all vital areas when it comes to growing a business. And Andrew, he has almost 10 years of executive level management experience in retail operations. And we definitely will discuss his entrepreneurial pursuits throughout this episode. So with that being said, welcome, Andrew. I'm so glad you're on the show here today.
Thank you. I appreciate you for having me. Super looking forward to the conversation.
Of course. So to get things started, can you share with the audience a little bit about your background and experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Andrew Adeniyi. I'm a first generation Nigerian American. Studied entrepreneurship from the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University, and then got my master's from Michigan State University, where I studied management, strategy, and leadership. And most of my background, like you mentioned, has been in retail operations and consulting. So I've worked for companies like Kroger, Aldi, and Starbucks, and I have been doing consulting and speaking work for the last 4 years or so. So very passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion, as you mentioned, as well as organizational culture and leadership.
Yes. So I know that really transitions into my next question with your book, The Circle of Leadership, where you're really hitting on a lot of these areas that are important for a business, and it's really a framework for creating and leveraging culture. Can you describe what the book is about and also the problem you're trying to solve for leaders that are running a business?
Yeah. So basically, the book can work as a framework for an entrepreneur to use from day one as they're creating their organization, things to keep in mind as they create and grow culture. It's also designed for leaders in existing organizations that have a culture that could just use improvement, right? It works in both scenarios because it walks you through what I call the three P's of culture. That's purpose, people, and process. So the book helps leaders amplify their purpose, develop their people, and simplify their processes. And the problem I'm trying to solve is too many people hate going to work. If you look at the engagement statistics that Gallup puts out year after year, people don't like going to work. And I want to change that. And the way you change that is through culture and leadership.
Yes, I totally agree. Just even for myself, man, I always, when I'm working for a company, I'm always looking for what their culture is and if it aligns with my core values. And I think you're absolutely right. It's about fostering that culture so that way people feel welcome to want to come inside of the workplace. So can you share the importance of purpose, people, and process? Just that what you just described within the book, how you kind of focus on that whenever you're consulting with the businesses that you work with.
Yeah, when we think about purpose, it's really just why. Why are you here? Why do you do what you do? And just continue to ask yourself why until you get to the core of what that is. And when business leaders can keep that at the forefront of their mind, it makes decision making very easy, because very quickly and very easily you can determine, does this fall in line with our purpose? And if it doesn't, we don't need to be wasting time on it. And that's what the first P in the three P's of culture really talks about is, what's your mission? What's your vision? What does success look like for you? What are your core values, right? What parameters are you going to be leveraging as you make decisions as a business leader? And that's what your core values essentially are. So that's what all the first P about is, just purpose, essentially asking yourself why.
Yes. So can you kind of talk on like how you help different businesses with focusing on the people and simplifying the process? I know when I got a chance to look at your website, you really emphasize that when it comes to developing people, it's good to have a diversity and inclusion strategy. And then with simplifying the process, it's more of the training and development, the delegating responsibilities and things like that. So can you kind of talk on how you focus on the people in the process when you are talking with businesses?
Yeah, I think Jim Collins said it best. You got to get the right people on the bus and get them in the right seats, and you get the wrong people off the bus. And that's that's people 101, right? That people need to look at it from that perspective. The other thing I would add is something that a Ramsey personality, Chris Hogan, shared, and that's the acronym AIR. He wasn't talking about oxygen. He was talking about appreciation, inspiration, and recognition. And that is what I really try to help leaders walk through. It's like, when's the last time you gave genuine and authentic praise and recognition to your team? Like, when was the last time? Regardless of how poorly they're performing or how you feel about them, there's definitely things that they do very well that you appreciate that you haven't spent enough time giving that feedback. And there's a quick story I want to share about that. David Novak, the former CEO of Yum Brands, they own companies like KFC. He used to work for Pepsi, and one day he said, "I want to find the best person in sales in the company. I want to find him." So he went to one of the plants and he was like, "Which merchandiser is the best person at sales?" They all got in a room, got around a table, and everyone said, "It's Bob. Bob's the best person in the company at sales. He's remarkable." And they went around the table and everyone just sang the praises of Bob. Now, Bob was in the room at the table. So David, who's also sitting at the table, looks down and sees Bob's head in his hands, crying, sobbing. And David's like, "Bob, everyone is singing your praises, talking about how great you are, and you're crying. What's wrong?" He said, "I'm about to retire. I've been working here for over 40 years, and I never knew that people I worked with felt this way about me."
Yeah, I think that the people in process, in as well as the purpose, those areas are so vital because you want to make sure. I love what you said about Chris Hogan. I listen a lot to the Ramsey personalities, but that appreciation, the inspiration, and recognition is so important because if you don't recognize, your employees, you don't show them that you care, you don't show empathy, they're not going to have the energy or the effort to want to bring their best abilities to work. So by being able to give them that recognition, no matter how small or big it is, it could be a game changer with fostering the right culture with your business. So I really liked how you mentioned that, and I wanted to discuss how you foster how within your consulting company, how you actually foster organizational culture for small businesses. I read a quote by Jim Senecal. He's the former CEO of Costco, and he talked about how culture is not the important aspect of a business, but it's the only aspect of a business. So how do you really emphasize that with your consulting work when you're trying to foster organizational culture?
Yeah. I mean, it starts with the first P. It starts with purpose. What's your purpose? What's important to you as a small business leader in an organization, right? If you say belonging is on the wall, it's a core value on the wall. This is what we live by, but you give the team a survey and people aren't saying they feel a sense of belonging. Well, clearly that's not a value of the organization. That's just something you like to put on the wall. So that's where I start. What are we about, and how do you validate that you are what you say you are? And when you do that, that then allows you to attract the right person, slow down and take your time to look for the right individual. And that's where a lot of my DE and I work comes in. It's, hey, a lot of business leaders say, "I can't find diverse talent." Well, where are you going to find them? If you continue to go to the organization that's 97% white, you're not going to find them. If you continue to not have strategic partnerships with organizations that their purpose is to uplift minorities, where are you ever going to find outstanding talent? So a lot of times it's, how do we get our purpose solidified? How do we be intentional and practical about finding the right people to get on the bus in the right seats? And then the last P is really the simplifying processes. What things are you doing internally that are clunky, that are not allowing you to maximize revenue, minimize expenses, right? And I help leaders go through a deep dive of evaluating that.
Yes, so you mentioned diversity and inclusion, and that's one topic that I really wanted to talk on because I feel like, especially last year, with everything we saw with just police brutality with George Floyd, and a lot of these corporations that came out and explained that they need to have more black people on their board of directors. Can you kind of talk about what are the challenges you're seeing in your industry with diversity and inclusion, and how do you help with some of those challenges when you have these conversations about a more inclusive environment?
What problems do I see? Well, the former chief diversity and inclusion officer from Starbucks, Zing Shaw, she mentioned that the best D&I strategies are 70% inclusion, 30% diversity in terms of focus, strategic thought, resources, etc. That's the breakup. 70 inclusion, 30 diversity. One of the problems I see is business leaders want to put about 95% of effort towards diversity and very little, if anything, towards inclusion. The thing about it is, it's not difficult to get diverse talent. It's difficult to keep them, retain them, promote them. That is the challenge. And until you get your foundation, your soil correct in your organization, you can go out and pluck any diverse candidate you want that's a high performer. That doesn't mean they're going to thrive in your soil if you're not doing the inclusion work that's necessary.
Yes, I definitely think that employee retention is so important, and I kind of wanted to get your perspective of how, whether it's a leader that's working in the business for a major Fortune 500 company or even an entrepreneur for startup, how do they really help with employee engagement, where they can help with that retention and productivity? What are some strategies that you can kind of mention that helps with those things?
Number one is awareness. Are you even aware? Do you have a good pulse on where your team is at? And that can be done through surveys. I always recommend at least yearly, but ideally, probably every 6 months, you want to keep a pulse on how the team is doing. You want to share the results of that survey as well. That vulnerability and transparency is going to go a long way with the team for you to be able to disclose where you're at, where your strengths and weaknesses. The next thing I would say is acting upon the survey results. Like actually showing your team, when you tell us where we're missing the mark, we are going to put bandwidth and energy and resources behind figuring that out and solving that. And regardless of how poor your culture is, if you're aware of it, you're transparent about it, and you actually are intentional with addressing those issues, 9 times out of 10 it's going to get better. So those are one of the first 3 steps I would recommend to a leader if they want to turn things around there. And then a healthy dose of appreciation, inspiration, and recognition, right? Finding your team doing things right instead of just grabbing all the necessary thing or all the opportunities that they may have.
Yes, I totally agree. Now, talk to me about like accountability. I think that that's one component that's very important when you're trying to grow a team, when you're trying to foster a culture. How important is accountability when you're trying to not only retain your employees, but also wanting to see them grow and holding them accountable to performance metrics? Do you ever speak on that, like as far as accountability?
Yeah, absolutely. Accountability is huge. It can just erode employee engagement. It can just destroy cultures because what it is, it's trust. It builds trust when leaders are accountable for their actions. It lets your team know that, hey, you're not too high and mighty. You're not too above the law to where if you mess up, you don't have to take responsibility for your actions. So accountability is important for building that trust with your team and letting your team know, hey, well, number one, it's okay to fail. Just own it, learn from it, and get better. And as a leader, you've got to actually role model that and display that and show that. You can put your foot down without stomping it. That's a phrase that I love sharing because a lot of leaders struggle with balancing empathy and accountability. And a lot of times they'll be too soft. Well, you got to be soft on the person, hard on the problem, right? So you can still build that relationship with that person and have impact in the correct way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I like that, being soft on the person but hard on the problem. So I wanted to talk about a statistic that you actually had when I was looking through your website of how 88% of executives say that they don't foster the right culture, and this was said by Deloitte. And I wanted to kind of get your perspective on that. Why do you think that there's so many companies out there that don't foster the right culture?
Because it's an intangible. It's very easy to check your inbox. It's very easy to check the numbers and complete that spreadsheet. It's very easy to sign off on that project. It's very easy to do these tasks that are right in front of you, that have deadlines, and that are concrete. And business leaders are busy. I haven't met very many that's like, man, I wish I could figure out what to do with all the time that I have. I'm so bored. No, it's typically the opposite. You don't have time for anything. So when you don't have time, the intangibles, that's the last thing you're worried about. The problem is the intangibles is really what moves the needle the most when we talk about culture. We're talking about remembering a birthday. We're talking about handwritten cards at Christmas time. We're talking about remembering a child's name. We're talking about sending flowers to the sick, relative of the family, the person you work with. All those things that you don't have to do any of that. But those are the things that will build relationships, build trust the most, and will allow you to get the most out of individuals.
Yeah, I look at it as, from a business standpoint, when I think about tangible and intangible assets, an intangible asset is something that people can't see. They don't see the patents, they don't see the copyrights, the trademarks, but it's important in order for your business to have certain protection, to be able to just grow as a business. And what you're talking about is just the intangibles that it takes for when you're building and fostering the right culture. You want to have that recognition when there's a birthday coming up, or you do surveys and you notice that there was something that you're missing on, and you're trying to solve the problem and make the adjustments. I think the intangibles is so important in business. So you're absolutely right. And I'm curious to know, how has the landscape been with speaking engagements for you since the post-pandemic? I know we're still technically in the pandemic still with some of the cases rising, but what changes, or how have you seen the landscape being with speaking engagements?
Yeah, I would say my speaking engagements were sporadic prior to the book coming out. I'm the co-founder of a nonprofit called Can I Be Real Incorporated, and our goal is to really inspire people to take action, specifically around systemic racism and social injustices, but of anything that people are passionate about. So I would obviously speak around that and some other things for work, but with my book in particular, that launched in the midst of the pandemic. So all of those engagements were virtually over the last year and a half. It's just now getting to a point where people are really wanting to speak in person. So it's been great getting back out there and talking to teams and talking to audiences and whatnot in person.
Yeah, it's great to finally see that the economy is starting to reopen, and it's much better seeing a conference in person rather than virtually. So it's great to see that everything is starting to go back to normal. And I know that you mentioned that you had a nonprofit. Can you kind of talk about the purpose of creating that nonprofit, and what you're seeing, the longevity of what you're trying to accomplish with that organization?
Yeah. So one of my fraternity brothers, Mark Hardy, he is the co-founder with me, and he actually wrote a book called "Can I Be Real?" And it really just came after Dylan Roof walked into that church in the South and killed those individuals, and he was so broken by it, he needed to do something. And the way that he expressed himself was through writing, and he ended up turning it into a book, right? And although at the time it was just kind of a healing mechanism, a way to take action, it spurred something much greater. And through our connections, I encouraged him, hey, you should make that a nonprofit. So we eventually teamed up officially and made it a nonprofit. And the goal is to really just get people to go from that feeling of, man, I want to do something about what I'm seeing, or I want to do something about this problem, but I have no idea how to start. Like for people who have ever been in that space, that cannot be real for you, because I was in that space personally. After police killing of unarmed black men in the news, I remember having a conversation with Mark, like, man, what do we do? And he said, a lot of people get discouraged because they think about how large the problem is, and then it's too overwhelming for them to take any action. He said, if I can impact one person, I've done my job. And ever since he said that, it's completely flipped my mentality to say, I only have to impact one person. I don't have to change the world. I just need to change one person who could change one person who could eventually change the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel that so much, man. I think for us being, young black men, you know, in order for us to take action and want to see changes in our political system, and even just the police system as well. We can create a nonprofit like what you're doing to really help with the systematic racism, because I feel like it is a big issue. That's why conversations around diversity and inclusion is so important. But I definitely agree, and I know it's pretty sad to see that all that we have been through when we look at within our community, but it's also what makes us so strong, and why we are able to have the impact that we have as a community. So definitely keep up the great work with that. And I really wanted to also talk about just business strategy, when you are doing consulting work, when you're trying to help a organization help be able to improve their business strategy, are you mostly focusing on more of the process, or does it still go back to the purpose and the people when you're helping them specifically with like their business strategy?
Yeah, it depends what stage of their business they're at. If they're in their infancy, starting out as an entrepreneur or a very smaller business, then I go through that same framework, because you'll be surprised how many thriving businesses don't have a mission statement, don't have a vision, don't have core values. So when I come and I join them, I'm like, well, we have to go back to square one. I know you're making money, but it's going to be continuously difficult for you to make decisions because you don't have a compass. That's essentially what your purpose does. It's a compass, right? Because if we're only going to do X, Y, and Z, then as this decision comes along that you're stressed out about, you don't have any filtration system, any parameters to put that up against to determine how you want to attack it. So for the most part, I always go back to that purpose. Now, say the purpose is good and we're on the same page. They have it. They're good. They don't want to change anything about it. Well, then we start getting down to whatever strategic objectives they're trying to accomplish, whether that's leveraging strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, just an initial SWOT kind of strategy session, whether it's mapping out 3 to 5 year goals and determining how we can reach those different things. Every company is going to be a little bit different depending on where they're at on the spectrum.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's just more of seeing where people are at in their process, and kind of just filling in the dots or the holes of where they need to perfect their
And,
craft.
and, and before I forget, I will say this too. Some people just need a strategic thought partner. Some people just need somebody they can trust, a third party, unbiased perspective to come in. That's why I like consulting so much. I just get to come in, sit down, listen to your problems, and give you my perspective. And that's something I love doing. I got my master's in it, right? So that's something that I do naturally, and now I have some training and experience behind it. So it's fun to be able to problem solve with business leaders.
Yeah, the problem solving, the strategic planning is, I know it's probably a very great experience to help a company with just their process of strategic planning and becoming better. And I actually wanted to get your thoughts on what made you want to go into consulting, like what drew you into the industry.
Well, right out of college, I had a pretty high level management role. So at a very young age, I was able to have a lot of responsibility. And I realized that some of the things that I could just do like clockwork wasn't common knowledge to other people. They had different experiences. So I started realizing I was giving really good leadership advice in general. And they would circle back around after I'd give the advice, like, man, you were exactly right. I did boom, 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 and it worked out. So I started realizing just in real time, man, I'm good at giving people business and leadership advice. So then that turned into creating a branding company and consulting firm with one of my fraternity brothers. And we ran that for a couple of years, and that was great. But he ultimately needed to go to the West Coast to work for Google. I went to the East Coast for a work project because we were doing it on the side, and didn't really pick up consulting again until stumbled upon one of my longest clients that I've had now, and they wanted help with culture, but mainly diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this was even before, the George Floyd situation and all that. So I really admired their awareness to want to focus on that in that moment as they're growing. And that's just turned into what it is now, where I do a lot of speaking. I obviously wrote the book, speak a lot on that, and then try to consult small business leaders whenever I can.
Yeah, so walk me through as far as when you're doing your consulting work, do you look at it as a flat rate, or do you have more of like a fee based structure, as far as just the um how you actually are able to make revenue with consulting. Like what's your strategy as far as when you're working with companies? Are you doing it more hourly, or is it more of like a flat base rate
Yeah,
that you have?
hourly. Yeah, it would just be an hourly rate, and then depending on what they're wanting, I could just draft up a proposal to send over that lets them know and me know how many hours I anticipate needing to spend on whatever they need. And that obviously comes after an initial consultation where I'm asking a bunch of questions, a lot about the culture, the history, what's your mission, what's your vision, what do you got? So that's typically how I handle that.
Yeah, and do you as far as when you're working with these companies, is it a long term relationship where you're with them for years, helping them with fostering culture, or is it sometimes 6 months? How do you determine how long you need to spend with that company? Is that kind of written out in a contract? How does that process work?
If it's a good relationship, I'm fine with it lasting forever, right? Because if you're really viewed as a trusted business consultant and strategic thought partner, it doesn't matter what the topic is, they'll want to get your thoughts on it, right? Obviously, if it's completely out of your wheelhouse, it wouldn't apply. I'm not going to consult on law or things that aren't my expertise. But if it's in my wheelhouse, absolutely, I would love for them to continue to keep me in mind as a thought partner. So my goal is always to retain clients. Now, if it's not a good fit, then obviously I'm not going to try to renew a contract or something like that. But I found that 6 to 12 months seems to be that sweet spot, just to continue to reevaluate. Hey, are you getting what you're needing, and is it worth the time and effort that I'm putting in?
Yeah, that's really good to hear. So like, what do you see as far as the future with the consulting industry? And just for yourself, like, what are kind of some of the innovations that you see from a consulting standpoint? Kind of what are some things you kind of see foreseeing for the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Just consulting in general, I think, is a very dynamic and robust industry because I believe anyone can be a consultant. You may just consult on art or on finance or on cars or whatever it may be. But I think anyone who has enough experience and education and training in any particular field can learn how to effectively consult to people in that area. So I'm a big fan of consulting. I think the business is going to grow because of what I just shared. Anyone can really be a consultant. I think one of the cons to that is leaders having to kind of sift through the weeds, and the people who aren't serious, the people who aren't that credible and really don't know what they're talking about, or may have experience but aren't good at teaching and coaching with leveraging that experience to teach and coach. So I think that's one of the big concerns. I think you'll continue to find more electronic and like digital ways to consult. I don't know what that could look like in the future, but I would imagine tech and consulting combined is definitely going to continue to grow.
Yeah, that's one thing that I see for sure, man. I think it's kind of like with financial technology, even in the industry I work in with financial services, just all of the apps that are created, and even with blockchain and cryptocurrency, um, I'm seeing those type of innovations. But even with consulting, I can definitely see how digital technology just may make it a lot easier when you're consulting with businesses that you're working with creating different apps and different platforms. So I definitely think tech is going to only continue to evolve with consulting.
Yeah.
And as we're coming to a close, I did want to get your perspective of, what do you want people to take out of the Circle of Leadership when they read your book? What are some kind of the main ideas or concepts you want people to get out of the book?
I would say be dedicated and intentional with harnessing the intangibles of business, and that's culture. Fostering, creating culture can yield large returns, uh, greater than some of the tangible things that we tend to focus on day to day, week to week. So even if you carve out a small percentage of your time or your work week, make sure you're carving out some time. I recommend 20%, but I know that's a lot. But carve out some time of your week to be strategic, to be thoughtful, and to be intentional around building the culture of your team.
Yeah, A great book. I don't know if you read it, but it's called The 4 Hour Work Week with Timothy Ferris. I believe I'm saying the author's names
Hmm.
correctly, but it's
Yeah.
kind of talking on that, just how to be more strategic and intentional with your work week, with getting more done in a less amount of time. So I definitely think that everyone definitely go out and support the book, The Circle of Leadership. I'm going to put your website in the show notes so people can go out and support. And just the last thing that I wanted to ask you, Andrew, is how can others connect with you on social media and also with learning more about your consulting work that you do with different businesses?
Yeah, underscore AA Solutions. That's both on Instagram and Twitter, underscore AA Solutions. Very easy ways to interact with me on social media. Also very active on LinkedIn. First name Andrew, last name Adeniyi. And then my personal website as well, like you mentioned, is a great way to get in contact with me.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew, again for coming on the show. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think that when it comes to the framework of creating and leveraging culture, is so important for employee retention, employee engagement. Like you mentioned with the core values, having that purpose from the beginning, then moving into the people and then the process, it could definitely yield great returns, for an entrepreneur or even a leader that's in an executive management position within a company. So I thank you for your perspective, and I thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I could talk about this stuff for hours, so I appreciate you cutting this cutting this short. But thanks for having me.
Oh no! Oh, of course, man. And everyone, I did want to tell you, thank you so much for tuning in into another episode of Insightful Principles, and take care.